He checked his reflection in the courtroom window before signing, adjusted his tie, smirked. Because today wasn't a loss, today was freedom. Daniel Whitmore, tech entrepreneur, public speaker, self-made millionaire, was finally divorcing the woman he claimed had outgrown her usefulness. That's what he told his friends. That's what he told the woman sitting beside him now. His new fiancée, Victoria, young, beautiful, ambitious, a woman who knew how to stand beside power, unlike his wife. Across the courtroom, Elena Whitmore sat alone. No family, no dramatic lawyer team, no visible emotion, just stillness. The clerk slid the divorce papers across the polished wooden table. "Final confirmation of voluntary separation," she said calmly. Daniel didn't hesitate. He picked up the pen immediately, but before signing, he leaned closer to Elena. "You could have had everything," he whispered. "You chose pride instead." Elena didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't argue. And that silence irritated him more than tears ever could. "Say something," he muttered under his breath. Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes weren't red from crying. They weren't angry. They were clear, sharp. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did choose pride." Then she added, "And you chose ignorance." Daniel let out a short laugh. "Please, you walked away with nothing." He signed the papers with a bold, dramatic stroke. The scratching sound of ink against paper echoed louder than it should have. It sounded final, permanent, irreversible. He leaned back confidently, crossing his arms. "There," he said. "Done." Victoria squeezed his hand proudly. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already waiting. He had leaked the divorce to the press himself. He wanted the world to see him move on, to see him upgrade, to see him win. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but Daniel felt victorious already. And he thought this hearing was just paperwork. He thought this chapter was closed. He thought Elena was leaving with nothing but memories. What he didn't know wasn't this the end of a marriage? It was the beginning of his downfall. Because when the courtroom doors opened and the judge stepped inside, Daniel's smirk slowly disappeared, and for the first time that morning, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: uncertainty. The courtroom doors opened. "Please rise." Everyone stood. Daniel straightened his jacket, whispering to Victoria, "Let's finish this." Footsteps echoed across the marble floor, calm, measured, unhurried. The judge entered. Daniel didn't bother looking up at first. He was too busy checking his phone, probably texting the PR team about the press outside. Then he heard the voice. "Be seated." His fingers froze mid-scroll. Something about that voice. Familiar. Controlled. Too familiar. Slowly, Daniel looked up, and the color drained from his face. It wasn't a stranger behind the bench. It was Elena, not the woman sitting across from him, but the woman standing in judicial robes, the woman he married 7 years ago, Judge Elena Whitmore. The courtroom murmured. Victoria's hand slipped from his arm. His lawyer stood up immediately. "Your Honor, this is clearly a conflict of interest." Judge Elena's gaze didn't even flicker. "Counselor, I was assigned this case by random federal rotation 2 weeks ago. Both parties signed the confirmation." Mr. Whitmore insisted on fast-tracking the hearing. She turned a page calmly. "And he waived delay review." Daniel's heart began to pound. "You knew?" he whispered harshly across the room. Elena didn't answer him. She addressed the court. "Mr. Whitmore has petitioned for immediate asset separation under the prenuptial agreement he drafted before marriage." She lifted a thin folder. "You were very specific about protecting what was yours." A few people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Daniel forced a smile. "Yes, exactly." He leaned back again, trying to regain control. "That's why this is simple." But Elena wasn't finished. "Before we proceed," she continued evenly, "the court must acknowledge a detail Mr. Whitmore appears to have overlooked." Daniel's lawyer stiffened. "What detail?" Elena's eyes met Daniel's, direct, unblinking. "Section 4, paragraph B." She read aloud. "May any premarital financial investments made independently by either party shall remain the sole property of that party and are not subject to division." Daniel nodded impatiently. "Yes, That protects my company. A pause. Then Elena closed the folder softly. It also protects mine. Silence. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? For the first time since the hearing began, Elena allowed herself the smallest shift in expression. Not a smile, not revenge, just truth. When 6 years ago, she said calmly, when Whitmore Technologies was still operating out of a rented garage, I invested. The room went still. Daniel blinked. That was a loan? No, she corrected gently. It was equity. His lawyer grabbed the document stack, flipping frantically. Daniel's breathing changed. No, that was symbolic. Elena tilted her head slightly. It was notarized. She let that sink in. And it was 40%. The air left Daniel's lungs. Victoria slowly stepped away from him. 40%? His lawyer whispered. Elena folded her hands on the bench. Yes. And then she delivered the sentence that shattered the room. And I have never sold my shares. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. Because if she owned 40%, that meant board influence, voting power, authority, his authority. His smirk was gone now. And for the first time since he walked in, Daniel Whitmore realized this hearing was not going the way he planned. Daniel laughed, but this time, it didn't sound confident. It sounded forced. 40% doesn't mean control, he said quickly. I still have majority voting power. His lawyer didn't look at him. That's when Daniel felt it, that small shift in the room, the kind that happens right before bad news. Elena spoke calmly. You had majority voting power. Past tense. Daniel's head snapped up. What does that mean? She reached for another document. As of yesterday evening, when I exercised my rights as a shareholder, paper slid across the bench. An emergency board meeting was held. Daniel stood abruptly. You can't call a board meeting without me. Elena's eyes never left his. I didn't. A pause. The board did. His lawyer's hands started shaking as he read. Victoria slowly stepped back again. Daniel's voice rose. This is ridiculous. I built that company. Elena's reply was quiet. You built it with my investment. He slammed his palm on the table. Or they would never vote against me. Elena inhaled slowly. Then she said the words that shattered him. The vote was unanimous. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Daniel felt his knees weaken. No. Yes, she continued, steady and composed. You were removed as CEO this morning at 8:30 a.m. He looked at his lawyer desperately. Tell her she's lying. But the lawyer wouldn't meet his eyes. Because it was real. Daniel grabbed his phone, frantically dialing his assistant. Straight to voicemail. When he opened his email, 37 unread messages. Subject lines, board decision, transition plan, immediate leadership change. His breathing became uneven. They can't do this without me. Elena's gaze softened slightly, not with pity, with closure. You fired 3 senior board members last year because they questioned you. She let that sit. I bought their shares. The room went silent again. You what? Daniel whispered. You were busy building your image, she said calmly. I was building leverage. Victoria finally spoke. You said you owned everything. Daniel turned to her. I do. But his voice didn't sound convincing anymore. Elena leaned forward slightly. There's more. Daniel felt dread crawl up his spine. You also signed a personal guarantee against company debt 2 years ago. His lawyer froze. You didn't disclose that to me, the lawyer muttered. Elena continued. With your removal as CEO, may that debt fall solely on you. The words hit harder than anything else. Debt. Personal. Millions. Victoria's hand slipped from his arm completely. You said we were secure, she whispered. Daniel looked around the courtroom. Reporters had arrived quietly in the back. Phones were raised, recording. He had invited the press to watch his victory. Now they were watching his collapse. Elena delivered the final blow of the moment. You walked into this courtroom believing you were divorcing a liability. She paused. You were releasing your only ally. Daniel's hands trembled, not with anger, with fear, because this wasn't emotional anymore. This was financial destruction. And he could feel it. The empire he bragged about. The company he weaponized, the power he used to belittle her, gone in less than 20 minutes. And for the first time since the hearing began, Daniel Whitmore was not the most powerful person in the room. Daniel didn't sit down. He couldn't. It felt as if he sat. He would never stand again. "This isn't over," he said, but the fire in his voice was gone. It sounded like a man arguing with reality. Elena looked at him for a long moment, not as a judge, not as an investor, but as the woman who once believed in him when he had nothing. "Daniel," she said quietly, "it's been over for a long time." The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped whispering. "You didn't lose your company today," she continued. "You lost it the moment you started believing you built it alone." He swallowed hard. For the first time, there was no arrogance on his face, only realization. "You planned this," he said. "No," Elena replied softly. "You planned this." She stood. And when she stood, the room shifted with her. I drafted the prenup. You rushed the divorce. You invited the press. You waived asset review." She paused. "I simply honored your decisions." Daniel's chest tightened, because she was right. Every step that led him here, he took himself. Victoria quietly picked up her purse. "I can't be part of this," she whispered. And just like that, the woman he thought was his upgrade walked out without looking back. The doors closed, and the sound echoed. Daniel looked around the courtroom. The people weren't staring at him with admiration anymore. They were watching a lesson unfold. He finally spoke again, but this time his voice cracked. "Elena, we can fix this." That was the first honest thing he had said all day. And it was too late. She stepped down from the bench, walked past him, close enough that he could feel her presence, but not close enough to touch. "You taught me something," she said gently. "That love without respect becomes a transaction." She stopped at the doorway, turned slightly. "And I don't do business with people who underestimate me." Then she walked out. No dramatic music, no revenge speech, no anger, just certainty. Daniel stood alone in the courtroom he thought would crown his victory. Instead, it exposed him. He didn't just lose his wife. He didn't just lose his company. He lost the one person who saw him as more than his success. Before the world did. And that, it was the one thing he could never buy back.